The war was supposed to have rules. There were treaties, agreements, and unspoken understandings between species across the galaxy. No one targeted the wounded. No one harmed the healers. Even the most ruthless warlords followed this rule. But the XLNR didn't care. It started as a simple distress signal from Medical Station Hope, a floating hospital orbiting a small moon near the front lines. The station was filled with injured soldiers from both sides, human and XLNR alike. Doctors, nurses, and medics worked tirelessly to save lives, no matter who they belonged to. Humanity had extended its kindness, believing that mercy could bridge the gap between enemies. Then, without warning, the XLNR fleet arrived. At first, the humans thought it was a mistake. Perhaps the XLNR were coming to evacuate their wounded. But then the first shots were fired. Not at armed ships, not at defenses, but directly at the hospital. Panic spread through the station. Patients who had barely survived the battlefield now found themselves trapped in another slaughter. The doctors and nurses tried to send out messages, pleading for a ceasefire. They reminded the XLNR of the laws of war, of the sacred duty of medics. The enemy never responded. Explosions ripped through the hospital structure. Metal walls twisted and shattered as emergency alarms blared. Fires spread through the halls, filling the air with smoke and screams. Doctors shielded their patients, trying to drag them to escape pods, only to be gunned down by XLNR soldiers who boarded the station. There was no mercy. A young nurse, barely out of training, tried to hide a group of injured soldiers in a storage room. She held her breath as heavy boots stomped past. For a moment, she thought they were safe. Then the door was kicked open. The last thing she saw was the cold, unfeeling eyes of the XLNR warrior before he pulled the trigger. Back on Earth, the distress signal finally reached military command. At first, there was confusion, then horror, and finally, a deep, burning rage. The attack wasn't just a violation of war. It was an insult to everything humanity stood for. The rules had been broken. And if the XLNR thought humanity would just accept this atrocity, they had made the worst mistake of their existence. You said, the images spread faster than any weapon could strike. Live feeds from the hospital's security systems, emergency broadcasts from terrified medics, and intercepted XLNR transmissions. Everything was recorded. Everything was seen. Humanity did not need to be told what had happened. They watched it happen. The screams of the wounded echoed across every communication channel. The faces of the doctors, pleading for mercy, were burned into the minds of every human who saw them. The blood-streaked halls of Medical Station Hope, the fires consuming operating rooms, the lifeless bodies of men and women who had sworn an oath to heal. These were the last moments the galaxy saw before the transmission cut to static. Humanity did not speak. For a full hour, not a single response came from Earth or its military command. Not a single message, not a single threat. Just silence. And then the storm came. Every fleet, every soldier, every weapon once held back by diplomacy was unleashed. The great chains of restraint, once held firm by laws and treaties, shattered in an instant. The XLNR had declared themselves beyond the rules of war. Fine. Humanity would show them what war truly looked like. Admiral Cole sat in the war room, his knuckles white as he clenched the edge of the table. His eyes, hollow and dark, remained fixed on the images of the massacre. He had seen war. He had lost soldiers before. But this was something else. Across from him, General Vasquez exhaled slowly, his voice a cold whisper. No prisoners, Admiral. Cole did not nod. He did not blink. He simply tapped the command panel in front of him. A single word appeared on every screen across Earth's military network. Authorized. The order was given. The fleets moved. The 9th Tactical Division, known as the Hellhounds, mobilized first. They had always been Earth's last resort. Specialists in warfare so brutal that even other humans hesitated to use them. But today, There was no hesitation. Every ship left port, every Black Ops team deployed. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. But soon, they would. You said. The stars above Selnar Prime remained peaceful, undisturbed by the chaos that brewed just beyond the system. The alien leadership sat within their great war chambers, their arrogance unshaken. They had silenced the weak. They had eliminated the human medics. They expected threats, demands, maybe even diplomatic outrage. What they got instead was war. It began with the silence before the storm. The Selnar defense stations, positioned at the system's edge, detected nothing. No ships, no transmissions, no approaching fleets. And then, in a single moment, they all went dark. Admiral Cole did not send a declaration of war. He did not waste time with threats. He did not ask for explanations. The time for words had passed. The hellhounds struck first. Selnar Prime's outer colonies burned before the enemy even understood what was happening. Orbital bombardments rained down upon key military installations. Human shock troopers, enhanced and unrelenting, breached planetary defenses before alarms could even sound. These were not ordinary soldiers. These were the ones humanity kept locked away. The ones trained not for battle, but for extermination. Commander Dane Vasquez, leading the first wave, landed with his unit near the largest Selnar war foundry. His boots hit the ground, and in a single motion, his rifle was raised. No orders were needed. His team moved like ghosts through the city ruins, their armor dark, their eyes glowing with the eerie red of combat visors. A Selnar patrol stepped into their path. In less than 3 seconds, the entire alien squad was gone, cut down by gunfire so precise that even their corpses hit the ground in perfect unison. This was not war. This was not a battle between equals. This was retribution. Human forces moved like a virus through the enemy strongholds. Power grids failed. Communications were hijacked. The Selnar, for all their pride and power, had never fought anything like this. They had fought soldiers before. They had fought fleets and armies. But this was something else. This was the fury of a species wronged. In the heart of the Selnar capital, Supreme Warlord Krell watched in horror as reports flooded his command center. Every defensive line was collapsing. Every reinforcement was being wiped out before they could even react. He turned to his generals, desperation in his eyes. What are they doing? Where are their demands? Their warnings? Their terms? One of his advisors, trembling, whispered the only truth left. They're not here to negotiate, Warlord. They're here to end us. The war the Selnar thought they had started had already ended. And now it was only a question of how much of their species would be left to tell the tale. You said. The night sky above Selnar Prime was no longer dark. It burned. Fires raged across the capital as human warships hovered in the upper atmosphere, raining down destruction with pinpoint precision. Every military installation, every command center, every stronghold of the Selnar was crumbling. The enemy, once so confident, so arrogant, now found themselves hunted, running through the ruins of their own cities like frightened prey. But even as their world fell apart, some of them still clung to a final hope, a hope that humans, despite their terrifying wrath, would show mercy. Admiral Cole watched the battlefield from the bridge of his flagship, the UNS Vengeance. His face was unreadable, his gaze cold as he monitored the feeds from his ground forces. The Hellhounds had done their job well. Too well. The Selnar war machine was dead. Their armies shattered. Their leaders were either killed or in hiding. Now came the real question. Would humanity stop? A transmission came through. The Supreme Warlord Krell himself. His face was bruised, his once proud armor covered in soot and blood. Behind him, his command center lay in ruins, filled with the desperate, the wounded, and the dying. Human Admiral, please, we surrender. His voice was weak, his arrogance long gone. We were wrong. We see that now. Call off your forces. There is no need for further bloodshed. Cole's expression did not change. No need. His voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it, sharper than any blade. Your people ambushed our medical ships. You slaughtered our doctors, our healers, the very people sworn to save lives. You broke every law of war, every code of honor. And now you ask for mercy. Krell swallowed, his hands shaking. He had expected demands. He had expected conditions, but he had not expected the sheer hatred in the human's voice. You misunderstand, Admiral. Krell tried again. It was never meant to go this far. We thought humans would fight as other species do. We did not realize. No, you didn't, Cole cut him off. Silence filled the bridge. The officers and soldiers of the UNS Vengeance stood motionless, waiting for their admiral's next words, waiting for judgment. At that moment, the fate of an entire species hung in the balance. Cole turned to his communications officer. Patch me through to Commander Vasquez on the ground. Within moments, the grim face of Dane Vasquez appeared on the main screen. Behind him, fires burned, and the distant sounds of battle still echoed through the ruined streets. Sir. Vasquez's voice was calm, steady. Cole exhaled slowly. The XLNR are surrendering. Supreme Warlord Krell himself is begging for peace. Vasquez gave a slow nod. His soldiers stood behind him, their weapons at the ready. There were no cheers, no celebrations, only cold, unwavering discipline. What are your orders, sir? Vasquez asked. For a long moment, Cole said nothing. Then he turned back to Krell, his expression still unreadable. You killed our healers, Cole said, his voice low and dangerous. Tell me, Supreme Warlord, if I were to grant you mercy, if I were to spare your people, what do you think the families of our murdered doctors would say? Krell opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He already knew the answer. Because deep down, he knew mercy was never an option. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Supreme Warlord Krell stared at the screen, his alien eyes filled with fear. His once mighty empire was now reduced to ruins, his people scattered and broken. The capital of Selenar Prime, once a beacon of their power, now burned in the shadow of Earth's wrath. He had gambled on human weakness, on their supposed morality, and now he stood on the edge of extinction. On the other side of the transmission, Admiral Cole remained motionless, his gaze unwavering. There was no mercy left in him. Human Admiral, please, I understand now. We were wrong. We acted without honor. But if you destroy us completely, you will be no different than us. Krell's voice was desperate, shaking. Cole let out a slow, controlled breath. No different. His mind flashed back to the horror. The medics, torn apart. The hospitals, reduced to nothing. The pleas for mercy that went unanswered by the XLR. You still don't understand, do you? Cole said, his voice sharp as a blade. This isn't about revenge. This isn't about rage. This is about justice. Behind him, the officers of the UNS Vengeance stood in absolute silence. None of them doubted what had to be done. The XLNR had chosen this path the moment they slaughtered the innocent. Admiral, Vasquez's voice came through the comms, steady and cold. Ground forces have pushed into the last XLNR strongholds. Their military resistance is collapsing. We estimate the war will be over within hours. What are your final orders? Cole turned slightly, considering his next words carefully. Every soldier on the battlefield was waiting. Every surviving Selenar was waiting. The entire galaxy was watching. No prisoners, he finally said. A ripple of silence passed over the bridge. Krell's face twisted in horror. You cannot, he gasped. There are civilians. Their heir. There were doctors. Cole interrupted. His expression remained unchanged. There were healers. They died screaming, Krell. You heard them. You let it happen. Krell shook his head, disbelief washing over him. He had expected Earth's retaliation, but not this. Not total annihilation. If you do this, Krell whispered, then humanity will become something far worse than we ever were. For the first time, Cole's expression changed. A smirk, barely noticeable, formed at the corner of his lips. That's the thing about humans, he said, his voice quiet, dangerous. You never should have given us a reason to stop being the good guys. The transmission cut. Krell screamed in rage and fear, but his voice was lost in the sound of incoming orbital strikes. The sky above Selenar Prime burned brighter as the final judgment of humanity descended upon them. There was no mercy left. You said. The sky over Selenar Prime was no longer blue. It was fire. It was ash. It was destruction raining down without hesitation, without mercy. The once mighty capital of the Selenar Empire now lay in ruins, its towering spires crumbling under the relentless bombardment. The streets, once filled with the proud citizens of a dominant galactic power, were now choked with smoke and screams. In orbit, the U.S. vengeance washed over the planet like a judge overseeing the doomed prisoner. Inside its command center, Admiral Cole stood tall, arms crossed, watching as the final phase of retribution unfolded. Around him, officers moved with grim efficiency, issuing orders, confirming strikes, ensuring the complete dismantling of the enemy's ability to ever rise again. This was not war. This was extermination. Admiral, reports coming in from the ground teams, said Vasquez, her voice steady, emotionless. Selenar command centers have fallen. Their fleet is gone. There's nothing left but scattered resistance. They're begging for surrender. Cole exhaled slowly. Surrender. The word echoed in his mind, cold and meaningless. The Selenar never gave Earth's medics a chance to surrender. They butchered them in cold blood, turned hospitals into graves. And now, they'd wanted mercy. Patch me through to all ground forces, Cole ordered. A few seconds later, his voice carried across every human soldier's helmet, every battleship in orbit, every strike team still clearing out the last remnants of the XLR. This is Admiral Cole. You all know what they did. You all know what we lost. You all know why we're here. A pause. Every soldier on the battlefield listened. Every surviving Selenar trembled. No negotiations. No survivors. The silence that followed was brief, but heavy. Then the final phase began. On the ground, the Selenar ran. Civilians, soldiers, high-ranking officials, all of them desperately fled through the shattered ruins of their once proud cities. Some tried to hide. Others fell to their knees, screaming for mercy. None of it mattered. Humanity had already passed the point of forgiveness. Squads of human soldiers moved through the war-torn streets, their weapons precise, their strikes cold and methodical. Buildings collapsed in controlled demolitions, leaving nothing but dust behind. In one sector, a Selenar general clutched his wounds, his breathing ragged as he hid in the wreckage of what was once a military bunker. He had once ordered the executions of Earth's medics, calling them non-combatants unworthy of life. Now, as he heard the rhythmic approach of human boots, he realized what it felt like to be helpless. Please, he started. The human soldier standing over him didn't hesitate. A single shot. No words. No hesitation. In another part of the city, a Selenar mother clutched her child, watching as soldiers moved past them. For a brief moment, she dared to hope that humanity wouldn't go as far as complete extermination. That hope shattered when a massive shockwave from a nearby orbital strike shook the ground. The war wasn't over. Humanity would make sure it never happened again. Back on the UNS Vengeance, Admiral Cole watched as the planet fell silent. All key targets neutralized, Vasquez reported. No remaining military presence. Civilian centers are almost gone. Almost, Cole asked. Vasquez hesitated for a second before responding. Some of our troops reported. Hesitation. Some of them didn't fire on non-combatants. Cole's expression didn't change. Remind them what the XLNR did to our medics. If they hesitate again, they'll be relieved of duty. A chill spread across the command center. There was no room for doubt, no room for hesitation. Understood, sir, Vask said, before relaying the order. Cole turned back to the screen, watching the fires consume what remained of the Selenar Empire. They had made the rules of war meaningless when they slaughtered the defenseless. Now, Earth had rewritten the rules. There would be no survivors. No one left to tell this story from the Selenar's side. You said. The once mighty Selenar Empire was no more. Its cities had been turned to rubble, its armies erased, and its leaders executed. For days, the fires of war had raged across their homeworld, consuming everything in humanity's path. What began as vengeance had become something far greater, a lesson written in blood. Yet, even in the aftermath of such devastation, the ghosts of war still lingered. On the ground, among the ruins, Captain Elias Carter walked through the wreckage of what was once the Selenar capital. His boots crunched over broken glass and charred stone. The air was thick with the scent of burnt metal and death. Smoke still rose from distant craters where orbital strikes had reshaped the city into a graveyard. Behind him, squads of human soldiers moved in formation, clearing the last remnants of resistance. But there was none left. The XLNR had no fight remaining. The war was over. Or at least, it should have been. As Carter turned a corner, he stopped. A small group of Selenar civilians huddled together in the ruins of a collapsed building. They were thin, weak, and trembling. Among them, a mother clutched her child, her large, reptilian eyes filled with terror. They had nowhere left to run. One of Carter's men raised his rifle. "Do we finish them?" the soldier asked, his voice flat. "Just another order. Just another mission." For a long moment, Carter didn't answer. He stared at the survivors, at their hollow faces, at their fear. He thought about the medics, the ones that Selenar had butchered in cold blood, the doctors, the nurses, the humanitarian workers who had been slaughtered simply for doing their jobs. The enemy had shown Earth no mercy. They had broken the rules of war, and humanity had responded in kind. So why did this feel different? The mother before him didn't look like a soldier. She wasn't carrying a weapon. Her child wasn't a threat. What justice was there in killing those who couldn't fight back? "Sir." The soldier pressed again, his finger resting on the trigger. Carter closed his eyes for a moment, then exhaled. "Stand down," he ordered. The soldier hesitated, then lowered his weapon. Others did the same. In that moment, something shifted. For months, humanity had been driven by rage, by grief, by the need to make the Selenar suffer. But was there a point where revenge became something worse? Carter looked at the Selenar mother again. She clutched her child tightly, waiting for the end. But it never came. He turned to his men. "The war is over," he said, his voice firm. "And we are not them." Aboard the UNS Vengeance, Admiral Cole listened to the report in silence. "Captain Carter let survivors go," Vasquez informed him. Other squads followed his lead. "Some civilians remain, but there's no government left. No army. No empire. Just the broken remains." Cole leaned back in his chair, staring at the holoscreen before him. The Selenar homeworld was still burning. But now, it wasn't just fire he saw. It was the cost of war. He had ordered total annihilation. He had wanted to send a message so powerful that no species in the galaxy would ever think of attacking Earth again. And yet, here was the question that now loomed over everything. Had humanity become the very monsters they once swore to fight? He let out a slow breath. "Pull the troops back," he finally said. "The lesson has been taught." Vasquez blinked. "Sir, we came for justice, not extermination," Cole continued. "If some Selenar survive to remember what happened here, to tell others what happens when you cross humanity, then that's enough. A long pause followed. Then Vasquez nodded. Understood, sir. As the order went out, thousands of human soldiers began withdrawing from the planet. The war was over, but its scars would never fade. The galaxy had learned what happened when you broke the rules of war. And humanity. They had learned what it meant to show mercy.